Welcome to the Real Recovery Show. Today is Veterans Day, and we're joined here with a lot of people from different perspectives to share on this very important topic. This is going to be a great episode because not only do we have people who served, but also people who were family and friends of, or just family and friends and spouse of somebody who served as well. Some of us have had addiction, some of us have had PTSD, some of us have had both, and we'll be sharing about that because the show's about recovery, and recovery is not just about whether or not you took a substance and you had a problem with it. It's about changing and growing and learning how to level up from whatever the perceptions that you've had and the programming maybe that you have from your childhood have been limiting you in a way that you could now have better relationships, not just with other people but with yourself. And be able to have new tools, to be able to help other people learn tools as well, to handle things so that we're not prone to having more problems and more troubles and more PTSD if we already have any. And so what we do all the time is we start off by qualifying so that we introduce ourselves to you and we let you know a little bit about why this topic is important to us. So I'll go first. So my father grew up with, he ended up having PTSD from his childhood. My great-grandfather was a semi-pro boxer, and his parents had convinced him to abandon his pursuit of being a professional boxer. He was very, very good. He even got written up in the local paper in Florida when he was in his 90s as being the fittest senior citizen. He was a specimen. And when he died, I actually got his sparring gloves. But this was incredibly important to him. I'm not saying that this is why he did what he ended up doing, but he did have some thinking that was a little askew because my dad became the punching bag for my grandfather. My grandfather stayed semi-pro for a long time because his parents told him that they were going to disown him if he went professional. So my dad already had trauma. My dad already had the thinking and the programming of not really having any healthy tools and processing his stuff and being what I would think more emotionally available, right? That's the verbiage that we use these days. But back then it was totally acceptable, right, for men to be tough and bring home the bacon, and just focus on work, and then the woman's role was more so in the home and taking care of the kids, and so my dad went into the Air Force, and I don't know why he went into the Air Force. I don't know when his addiction started. I don't know any of this stuff, partly because my dad passed away, but not that many years ago, but also because he never talked about anything. And when he did talk about things, he lied. So there was just, you had to take everything with a grain of salt in my house. It was that kind of thing. But my dad he flew a Fueler plane. I don't know really what they're called, but he had a trauma that he did tell me about. And I don't know if he had other traumas. I don't know anything, right? I do know about this. And he was flying a plane, and it was fueling another plane midair, and in the air, and when he went to pull away, they had not detached the hose from the other plane, and the plane was pulled, and from what he had said, was spinning, and there was a lot of fear and a lot of crazy, and he ended up getting into a lot of trouble for that. And that could be in and of itself quite jarring, but when you don't have the psychological tools to handle that and process that and not make it a permanent part of your don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, stuffed kind of programming, stuffed kind of baggage, and so he was married 3 times. He was an alcoholic. He smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day. He took pills to sleep, and he ate a lot of food, and he had a big food addiction and workaholism, sex addiction, and anybody but here, anybody but him, and he was going to be doing that. He spent an enormous amount of time in isolation. I ended up spending an enormous amount of time of isolation. I very much have had a lot of characteristics that are identical to my dad, and eerily, because I have two parents to mimic, and like eerily, like I'm a lot like my dad. But isolation and sometimes even suicidal. At one point, he threatened that if I didn't buy a house for him to live with me in it, that he would kill himself. And I ended up buying the house because I was afraid that he would do it. So it was that kind of climate psychologically for me. When my mother would complain about anything having to do with us kids, my mom would say, Eddie, and my dad would grab his belt off of the wall, wrap the belt around his wrist, and beat me with the buckle. He always hit us in chronological order, and I'm the oldest. And I definitely got, talking to my siblings, I definitely got most of the beatings because they don't even remember that much of being hit. So, yeah. It was interesting. It's been a lot to really work that stuff out. If you're somebody who grew up in child abuse or an emotionally frozen environment where the only acceptable emotions were depression and rage, please know that you can get help and you can heal from this stuff. I had severe PTSD, and the decisions I ended up making in my life were very subpar because of it, and ended up adding to my PTSD. The last thing I'll say, what qualifies me for this topic too, is that I craved structure, craved it. And I thought about joining the military. And instead, I ended up going to New York Military Academy, which is in upstate New York, and I loved it. I loved it so much that I ended up calling my mother and saying, can I please stay here? Because I needed it. I needed things to be simpler. I needed to not walk around not knowing who was going to do what, and who was going to have an emotion, and what was that going to be, and who was going to decide what. Like, I needed to feel like if you tell me XYZ, then I'll rely on it being XYZ. And I didn't even like everything about it. Didn't like how they sprayed the trees and the birds were dying on the walk when you did your loops around the thing on the campus. But I still loved it. I needed it psychologically, that kind of structure. And well into my life, I ended up finally getting structure later on through being in recovery and certain people and my own discipline of how I need my life to be, and my own self-searching to find out how I need to be. But wow, the chaos, the fear, the emotional roller coaster rides, the mental chaos, it was a lot, And so I very much thought about this. I've had a lot of friends who joined the military, some of who had childhoods that were dysfunctional and ended up finding more of a functional environment in it, but also some that ended up going in there thinking it was going to solve all their problems and going into the military and ending up having more trauma come from that as well. And it's always a mixed bag. This is not anything to say that the military is the save-all for everything, and it's not to be the scapegoat either. It's just that, what we bring into it, where our head's at, the experiences we have, and that we end up experiencing, it's whatever happens, it's not necessarily our responsibility that it happened to us, but it is our responsibility to do something about it and not perpetuate that kind of thinking, so that we're not just extending any kind of misery that we have in our own life, but maybe coming home and affecting our families or the environment or anything like that. This is all an inside job, folks, and today's a great day to talk about this very important topic. So, joined here with me right now is Bruno Moya, right?
Yes.
And he's going to share a little bit about his history and going into the military and what made him get prompted to get help.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. For me, I was raised in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, and during that time in the 80s, it was just a very chaotic place. My dad, he was in the military in Mexico, a very, very structured individual. He loved discipline a lot, and I did not like discipline, so we butted heads a lot. And when we moved to Las Vegas, I was 7 years old. Small kid, didn't know how to speak any English, got bullied all the time. My ESL teacher was this white guy who barely could speak any Spanish, and he was trying to teach us English, so I was just trying to figure stuff out. I think I still am, as a matter of fact. And so, at one point, my dad was like, hey, you're going to join the military. We love this country. Moved here. It's given us a lot. And you're going to join the Air Force.
Interesting.
And I was like, I'm not doing any of the things that you just said. And then this commercial came on TV that had this guy in regular clothes, and then he drew a sword, and then there was a dragon, and he was on the checkerboard, and he slayed the dragon. And I was like, that's what I want to do. And he was like, you're not going in there. Those guys are insane. They're crazy. And I was like, I know. Yeah. That's what I want to do. And so that's what I ended up doing. Similar to your grandfather, when I wanted to join the military, I told my parents that I wanted to be in the infantry active duty, and they were like, you're not going into the infantry active duty. We compromised on the reserves, and I was in the reserves infantry, and that, I think, messed with me a lot as well. I can resonate with your grandfather because for a long time I had a lot of anger because they didn't let me do the thing that I really wanted to do. And so joining the military, the first thing that you get taught is Marine Corps history, Tun Tavern. Every Marine the first Marines, we joined in a bar. The first thing that you got after you signed the paper was a beer, but you had to bring your own musket. And so drinking was the culture. It was the culture, and that's what we were getting taught. And I remember being 20 years old, 19 years old in the barracks. We got activated. I joined in June of 2001. I was still in boot camp, September 11th. Got activated, which I thought was great for me. In the barracks, all the guys were like, look, you're not 21 yet, so you can't drink, but you're fighting for your country, so if you drink, just don't get caught, was the type of attitude. And I had already started drinking when I was maybe like 16 years old, just fishing outside of a 7-Eleven, like, hey man, give me some old English or something, and just, it was disgusting, but it was the thing to do when you're a teenager in Vegas. Joined the military, was just drank a lot in the military, then went to Iraq, came back, finally got out of the Marine Corps in 2008. I did about 8 years total. And that was the transition for me was very rough. It was at the height of the recession. And so I went from being a combat instructor, a platoon sergeant in an infantry unit, to parking cars on the strip. And it was from, structure. I was the platoon sergeant. People looked up to me for leadership to like, hey, man, go fetch my car. Yeah. And that was very difficult. Just became very numb, especially after my tour in Iraq. Just saw a lot of fighting and stuff like that. Saw a lot of death. Try to integrate all of that, but I didn't know how. And so eventually one day my wife looked at me and she was like, I think you need help. And I was like, no, I don't need help. And then a couple of friends were like, hey, I think we need help. And so a bunch of us went to the VA and started trying to get help. And it wasn't really until I started going to school where I met Amy's husband a few years after that, where I really got my proverbial stuff together. But it wasn't over until a few years ago where I just really had a very spiritual experience and really got myself clean from a lot of things. And that's where I'm at now. I'm still in school, and I got two girls and a wife still. So very fortunate individual. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Awesome. Yeah. Okay, and Tom McCourt.
Hi.
I enlisted in 1980. I have the advantage of being a peacetime Marine. I was until the year before I enlisted, I was a tiny kid. I was bullied in school. I was the smartest kid in my class, and then I skipped a grade in Catholic school. So I was the smartest and the tiniest. So I was not really well liked. And so I think that somewhere in my head, my maternal grandfather served in the Marine Corps in World War II. He was on Iwo Jima. My paternal grandfather was in the Navy in the South Pacific. Most of my uncles served in the military, so I kind of thought I would serve. I knew that the military helped people solve problems, and that coupled with being bullied and being tiny. So I didn't just want to be in the military, I wanted to be in the Marine Corps. I didn't just want to be in the Marine Corps, I wanted to be in combat arms. I didn't just want to be combat arms, I wanted to be an infantry rifleman. So I wanted all the fun grunt stuff that you see in the commercials. I wanted to fast rope out of choppers and
And the dragons.
slay dragons. and
Still out there somewhere, man.
Yep. And yesterday was the 247th birthday of the Marine Corps. As Bruno mentioned, we were born in a bar in Philadelphia. The first Marine recruiter was the bartender. First commandant of the Marine Corps was the owner of the bar.
Right.
And the Marine Corps has never forgotten this. So anything good that happens in the Marine Corps, we drown it. Anything bad that happens in the Marine Corps, we drown it.
Yeah.
So I got off my period of active duty in the 80s. It was pretty soon after Vietnam, so there weren't a lot of people enlisting. And I got a job on a receiving dock, and I got another job as a customer attitude adjustment counselor in a strip joint. And it was I went
Customer
from
attitude adjustment
counselor.
counselor
I was
in a
not on the
strip
I was not on the entertainment side. Let's put it that way. And
That's awesome.
it was a big biker strip joint. Thankfully, before that watered down prostitution of champagne rooms and all that. But I went from the best job in the world, Marine grunt, to the second best job in the world, throwing guys out of a strip joint.
Yeah.
A little bit later, a lot of the Marines I served with, gone through boot camp with, gone through School of Infantry, and then down at Lejeune, in the first terrorist attack against our country in October of '83, what's known as the Beirut bombing. It was at the time the largest non-nuclear explosion in history, and 242 Marines and sailors died mainly in their sleep. So I knew that I had to process that, so I drank everything I could find for a couple of years. I was wound up in handcuffs a few times because I'd be sitting in a bar somewhere. Some idiot would make fun of the news story about the blown out Marines, and I'd throw them through the window. Thankfully, a lot of Philly cops are veterans, so I didn't wind up with any paper over that. But I wound up, eventually getting back to the idea of wanting to help people. So I started working in the court system, working with victims of domestic violence, worked with children abused and neglected kids in the foster care system. And I think aside from the Beirut bombing, a lot of my initial trauma came from that. I worked in what was called the Emergency Services Unit, where anytime family court is closed, there has to be a venue where victims of domestic violence can petition the court for PFAs, protection from abuse orders. So most of the folks that came in to see us were women with their children in tow. Half the time they were in bloody nightgowns with hospital bracelets on, and they're telling me what just happened to them. And we did the math at one point for a grant we were working on, and I think I was in that position for about 4 years, and I interviewed and helped complete a 14-page petition, somewhere between 28 and 35,000 victims of domestic violence. And again, the coping skills that I learned in the Marine Corps, I drank. I got out of work every night, midnight, 1 a.m., and I didn't so much go to sleep as I did pass out. Left that job and still wound up trying to help people, but not really dealing with things in a healthy, positive way. If you're looking for a short-term solution, say what you will about alcohol. If you want to change the way you feel, it will change the way you feel, right up until it doesn't. For me, at one point, it sort of stopped working. My first interaction, I guess, with recovery, I was still working at the strip joint, and a group of us went out, and it was a deer diary night. It was all my favorite vices. It was 3 or 4 bouncers, a couple of bartenders, and about a dozen strippers. So we were very, very popular in any bar we visited. And we hit every bar in Center City, which is a lot. And then a few after-hours clubs. And one of the young ladies I was with just kind of had a moment. And she was really upset that she had lost her purse. She had nothing in her purse, probably a little bit of weed was about it. I had her ID. None of us had credit cards. And she told me where she was going, and she said I was welcome to join her. She told me the name of the place, and I thought it was a really funny name for a speakeasy. And it was not a speakeasy. It was a recovery event. And we walked in, and she was already known to the folks at this event. So the ladies scooped her up, and I had 2 old men, being good cop and bad cop, poking me in the chest. And this guy who reeked of Aquavelva and Vitalis hair cream telling me, "You've got to surrender." I said, "Fuck you." He said, "Surrender completely." I said, "Fuck you completely." And this event had coffee, so I walked up and grabbed a cup of coffee. And before that coffee was cold, I was in a bar having the bartender pour Jack Daniels into it, telling him, "You're not going to believe this story." Then I proceeded to do a lot more research on use of alcohol for a few decades.
Personal research.
Yes, a lot of field research remained to be done. And it wasn't until about 6 years, 7 months, and just over 2 weeks ago, I had a major life-changing experience that I knew I knew one of 2 things was going to happen. I was going to murder someone, and I don't mean that in a figurative sense, or I had to change a lot. So I chose to change a lot. I loaded up a sea bag. An old buddy of mine, a Marine artillery officer, was living here in Vegas with his family. So I called him, said, I need a change. Checked myself into a rehab. And when I got out of that, I slept on his couch for a couple months. And I'm happy to say that I've found other coping tools.
Perfect. Thank you. When did you stop drinking? How old were you? Sorry, when did you start drinking? How old were you?
I started drinking when I was 12 or 13. I was in high school then.
And then when did you get sober? What's your sobriety date?
March 24th, 16.
2016.
So 6 years, 7 months, 15 days.
With nobody's counting.
Nobody's counting.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. And Carl Soriano is also joined here with us.
Well, happy Veterans Day to the guys here today. I'm really grateful that I get to be with you guys, and thank you, Lisa, for putting this podcast together. My early experience with, I knew as a young kid that I was a different person, you know, and uncomfortable in my skin, and always very oversensitive in a lot of things. And so I came from 9 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
And so I was number 5 of 9. And my first therapies, when I started going through therapy, was the first thing out of her mouth after I said I had 9 brothers and sisters. She said, "I'm sorry." I didn't know what she meant.
Yeah.
She goes, "Well, how could your parents nurture all of you?" And both my parents were hard workers. So what happened, my brothers and sisters raised us. So my recovery started when I was really in my addiction. I was living on the streets. I was doing a lot of things to survive because that's all I knew. So I was asked to leave at an early age, you know. And I think that was part of just me escaping into something.
Yeah.
You know, I was uncomfortable. But at the number 5 of 9 kids, you know, I was, my parents didn't really know where I was. I was always gone. And, but I was out doing things that, you know, kids do at a young age, you know, trying to fit in somewhere. So I ended up fitting in with a gang, you know, and that was my first connection of using drugs and alcohol. And it was just the way I started, and it was comfortable, you know, and I did a lot of things to get my drugs. And as I got worse into my addiction, It was just got worse and worse and worse until living on the streets, surviving on the streets, and doing anything to get my drugs and alcohol. So I lived on the streets for many years, and
How old were you in that time period?
I was 15.
Okay.
You know, I was being asked to leave. 9 brothers and sisters that, and that was just part of, I felt that I had to, go out and find myself, and through the drugs and alcohol that I did, it was an easy thing to deal with at the time, and so survival mode came in, living on the streets. But my experience when I first, and the reason why I went into the military, because I got really so bad in my addiction that I was going to work with short sleeve shirts, and I was shooting up, at the time it was cocaine, and I was pretty much gone because I was going to work with short sleeves, and having all the marks on my arms, and my friend would tell me, are you okay? Everything was fine, I thought. And he goes, but dude, what's going on with your arms? At that point, I was gone. I had no clue what I was doing or how I was acting, and what we called today, and I covered in recovery, I had a moment of clarity, which I know today was a moment of clarity and also a very good spiritual experience. I had that little moment of clarity, and it said, you can go and get help, or stay and die. And today I look at that as a miracle, because I took that. I don't know where I was. It was just a moment of like, you got to get out of here. So military was my option. Coming from being poor, college wasn't an option for me. And knowing that the military would be my, at the time I didn't know, I just knew I had to get out of my circumstances. And so I look today at, really my recovery started, with somebody telling me that, what's going on, bud? And I literally had to look down at my arms. He said, but dude, if you're going to do it, at least put on a jacket or something. But at that point I was gone already. And so that moment of clarity got me to the military. I was sent to South Carolina, and that was
what did you join? Which part of the
joined in
military?
'84, the Army.
The Army.
1984, and it was a different Army then too. I mean, back then in the '80s, they could still discipline you in ways that they don't today. And all I remember is it was much a different Army compared to what it was today, and it was much strict. And I'm grateful for that, because my survival that I learned in the military, I had to come out in the world and take those same traits and live. And I'm so grateful that I was able to this experience of recovery and my spiritual evolution of who I am as a person today. And looking back at almost, I'll say I have 14 years in recovery, January 7th of next year. I just believe that, that was supposed to be that for me. I mean, it was like, was I going to die? And then 14 years later and through my recovery, that I'm here alive and sitting in a podcast of recovery, and I get to share my experiences with my brothers in recovery and the military guys that I'm really proud of you guys that you get to do this, and we're here sitting today. And at least it's given the opportunity and a forum that we can relate to other veterans that are still suffering.
I'm grateful
It's
too.
been the best thing for me. I get to show up where I used to not show up, and I get to meet other guys that I get to know that are in recovery. And prior to this podcast, as we started, there was a lot of laughing, there was a lot of it was just a good feeling. I'm glad to be here, and just my life today, it has been a shift for me. I'm grateful for the recovery program that, I had to believe today that, it was because the fact is that, my higher power, whoever I want to call him, gave me the opportunity to survive and live.
Beautiful.
I'm supposed to be here celebrating Veterans Day with my brothers, and life is it's been an incredible journey for me. And I'm really proud to be an American soldier, and that I'll do it again. But the only reason why I'm here is because of recovery.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys for your service. And right now we're going to take a break. The opinions expressed here are strictly those of the people who gave them and do not represent any 12-step program or should replace your own intuition or professional medical advice. See you in a bit. Welcome back to the Real Recovery Show. Remember that you can watch us on Facebook, YouTube, and on Amazon Fire TV. You can listen to us on the PHLV radio app, or you can get our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. And if you just want something you can always go to, you can go to the meeting space and go to the Real Recovery Show. And you can click on that, and all of our episodes are posted. All of our episodes are every Friday at noon aired. And then they're all up there after that. And please definitely share with other people. And if you feel like a good topic or you want to be on an upcoming show, you can click on the intake form and fill it out so that we can see what you're into, what you're interested in, and maybe have you on a future episode. So anyway, we're going to continue our conversation for today's Veterans Day. Super excited to do all this. It's really great to hear people's personal experience and hope. And now we're going to talk about it from the other perspective. We're going to talk about it from the perspective of having grown up in it and ending up with being a spouse of somebody who's in the military, and what kind of thinking and how it affects somebody going through that experience as well. I shared a little bit already, so now I'm going to give it to my friend Amy Frost. Right? And she's going to share up for herself. Thank you.
I'm so honored to be here.
Oh, I'm glad you're here.
And this is my family, and so the military for me, I was born on an Air Force base. So I started pretty young, and I grew up in it. My uncle was a Navy pilot, and he died in a training mission. And so I have a picture of him holding me, and everybody's saying how great he was, but I didn't know him. So I didn't get to have that experience of growing up with him. My dad was a B-52 navigator. Your dad might have been one of those refueling missions with him.
Interesting.
It is. And there was my dad was fun, and, and he played jokes all the time, and he just was an amazing man before Vietnam. And then after Vietnam, he was quiet and reserved and snapped. And it's with my mom, there was 5 kids. I was the oldest, and so I was the one that took care of everybody. And my mother really very verbally abusive, and I think it was because she was raising these kids by herself. My dad was either deployed or on alert, or he was gone, and so I didn't feel protected by him. That I was left alone, and then I had to protect my sisters. And my mom, they called it diet pills, but they were amphetamines. And so I had to protect and make sure. And our family code was, and especially a lot of it in the military, is you got to protect your dad's career. And so it was like we had this pretty picture of these 5 girls and mom and dad, but it was rusted, but we kept painting it over. And I'm sure my parents were alcoholics, but nobody talked about that.
Right.
You just dealt with that. And I married into the Army. I thought, how different can that be than the Air Force? It is.
Yes. But not better or worse.
Different.
Just different.
Just different. And my husband, his dad was a Marine. And so he had trauma. And he went to a military academy. And I loved him, and I couldn't get to him. I couldn't, and there was stuff he didn't talk about, but there was crazy stuff going on. And he died in Desert Storm. And the first Desert Storm.
Right.
And for me, it had so much guilt with my work was more important, my career, everything was more important, because I had time, right? I figured I had time. And so that's a large part of why I do the work on the planet that I do now, is because I don't want other people to have to go through that. And you and I have talked about, they call it secondary post-traumatic stress. I get the concept, but it doesn't feel secondary to me.
Yeah.
And trying to deal with it. It's trauma.
Yeah.
So I had that trauma from childhood, plus, that on top of it, and dealing with that. And I had a few awakenings along the way. For me, was control food. Don't eat. Control. Making sure everybody's okay. Everybody, all the time. Everybody's okay. And if I work, if I just do one more thing, everybody will be safe. I'll be safe. And so those were the things for me. I kept burning out counselors, trying to make sense out of this. My husband said it was real. Oh my God, what's going on here? Because I had everything figured out till then. And then I ended up getting a master's in spiritual psychology because they kept burning out counselors. They couldn't handle me. They didn't know what to do with me. So that was an awakening, and I really feel like my recovery really started after that. And you were a big part of my recovery. I hope you know that. You handed me a book.
Yeah.
And you said you might want to read this. Yeah. And I was like, oh, yeah. That's very helpful.
Oh, awesome. Very cool.
Yeah.
I'm glad. It's kind of funny because when you grow up in a militaristic environment, or you grow up with parents who have PTSD, you do, if you're the oldest, it's crazy, but the oldest usually ends up becoming what's called a hero child. They feel an overdeveloped sense of responsibility and hyper-vigilant to their surroundings. And it's quite interesting, the amount of intensity and responsibility that really isn't supposed to be on a child. And sometimes it is given by the people who are not able to really stand up and be their role in the family. The child ends up becoming the therapist. The child ends up becoming so insecure that they need other people to be okay, for them to be okay. And so listening to your story, I so see, the pattern. Once you know how the mind works and how this happens and how the dysfunction ends up leading to more dysfunction, the codependency that we end up developing in an environment where people are not able to show up necessarily, the way we compensate and overcompensate, we learn these tools and it becomes normal to us, right? And so we'll end up getting into relationship after relationship after relationship where we're perfectly suited. It's kind of like what you were saying, Carl, like you learned how to be a survivor, right? And so you'll be in situations where you get to be a survivor, and like when you're codependent, it's like the codependency in you, like literally there'll be a room full of people, right? And maybe 85% of them are healthy, right? The codependent is bored by those people. And so the codependent will be like, oh, what's the matter? Why is that person not okay? Ding, and then I'll rescue you. Kate flies right out of the spine, and then the mating dance starts, and so it's interesting because you have this normal is the military life, normal is the father who is positive and loving and jovial, and then comes back and he's like shut down and guarded and stuffing his feelings and exploding, and normal is surviving and learning the skills to be able to handle that, but now that's part of your whole thinking, your programming, right? And so now your puzzle piece, if you will, psychologically, is going to look for another puzzle piece, and that's what happens. So we end up needing to end up recognizing, wow, like I can't be responsible for everybody else. I shouldn't even want to be responsible for everybody else. I've had to do a tremendous amount of work on codependency because of the things I've mentioned on every episode. It's like my programming was constantly like gravitating and doing things that, get into a relationship, and then a person goes and they're guarded, they're behind this proverbial plexiglass wall, and you're like trying to have a relationship with them, and you're in this hyper mode of trying to be on and do all the things, and then you feel bad for the fact that the relationship didn't get to, and you weren't able to be the person to rescue and fix, like, you feel bad. And the codependency takes responsibility for other people's lives. It takes responsibility for other people's well-being. Too much. It's great to be loving and kind and caring and want to join with each other, but once we take responsibility for another person in a way that's really truly unhealthy, it enables them, and it also keeps both of us in this toxic dance until one of us decides it's too much, or unfortunately dies. And so this is not a rare thing too. It's not that everybody that comes home from being in active service will experience this, but on some level, when you are in an environment, and there's been a lot of psychological, sociological studies about this, they've done it where they've taken even kids and they put them into like this this environment where they told the kids, half of you are going to be the guards in the prison, and half of you are going to be the prisoners in the prison. And they did this huge study when they were allowed to do that kind of thing, because they're not allowed to do that kind of thing now because they fucked everybody up. But I digress. So they did this study, and something really valuable came from it. There were kids that were friends with each other before this study took place. And at the end, they hated each other, wanted to kill, and believed on some level, truly believed that they were the prisoner or the guard, right? So then you go, and in any kind of environment where the culture is a certain way, the structure is a certain way, and it could be very supportive, it could also be ones in which you're afraid of messing up, it could be ones in which drinking is a big part of it, whatever it is, and then you take that and you go, okay, kidding, this is your life now. So you get out, and now what? I'll say this last thing, and I'll ask a question. They say, and this is kind of weird because when you think of trauma, right, you think of something like so horrific that the mind just, obviously everybody in the room would agree that this is a trauma. But trauma is actually when there is such a strong contrast that the mind can't regulate. It can't regroup, and it can't handle it, and it feels like it's like disoriented, and there's fear, and the mind doesn't, like, it's not fully whatever. So a trauma can actually be getting married. A trauma can actually having a child. A trauma can actually be, of course, losing a child, or a child growing up and going away to college, and you just spent your whole life focused on this child. A trauma can be going to school. A trauma could be graduating. Now what? A trauma can be getting a job, losing a job, getting out of a relationship. A divorce could be a trauma, but anything where there's a stark difference. So now you take the military and you take it where this is where they're at. They're in it. They're in the whole culture of it. This is the environment that they're in. And then you say, okay, now you're out. And so, Bruno, like, when you ended up going through that experience, what was that like for you?
Wow. So what was it like getting out of the military? Like I said, I exited at the height of the recession. So it was go to work, find work, be thankful that you have work, and then park cars, and then just individuals. Just think about it on the strip. People just, hey, go fetch my car and all of that. And that just made me very, very, very angry.
It must have also, like, you have people that are respecting you for the position you're in when you're in the military, and like, you have your relationships, right? And then you leave that, and the relationships aren't really there for you to have that experience, to feel like, it's because how we feel about ourselves. We're very identified with who we think we are, and what role we play, and how people see us, right? And so now you're having this other experience, and it was jarring.
Yeah, right? 100%. And really, I was very unavailable to my family, specifically to my wife and my daughter. I mean, now that I think about it, I remember one time, my wife was pregnant. She was about 6-7 months pregnant, right? And it was a Marine Corps birthday. So in the Marine Corps birthday, it's a huge celebration. And we went out to the ball. Took my wife back home, and then I went out with the boys. you know? And it was about 3, 4 in the morning. My wife is trying to call me. I'm not answering. Then she figures, all right, let me see where he could be at. So she shows up to this nightclub where she got it right. And she went in her nightgown, and I'm just sitting there dancing with girls on the dance floor. And she just comes up to me. She's like, hey, it's time for you to go home. You know, so that experience, not only did it traumatize her, it made me very guilty in the future. At the time, I didn't really care because I was so numb.
Right.
You know, but it also very, very much traumatized my child, who's still, you know, not born yet, but feeling these things, you know. And then, you know, years later, you know, my kid at some point, she was just feeling numb herself and like just couldn't understand what was going on with her. And that's when I had a realization that I not only had I really hurt my wife, but my kid as well. And so that's something that's a hard pill to swallow, to try to figure out, all right, how do I fix this? Now I have a child, and like all of us are sharing just the traumas of our parents and all of these other things. And I work with a lot of men, and consistently that's the thing that I hear is just the trauma of childhood, you know. And one huge realization that I've been having is just that the buck stops here with me. Yeah. Right. And so one thing that I did when I had that realization is I sat down with my wife and my kid. At the time, she was, I think, 13 or 14, and I apologized for that. My kid did not know that happened. Right. You know, but I came clean. I'm like, you know, you might be feeling very numb inside because when you were still in your mom's belly, this is who I was, and I was not able to provide any love for you, even in that process.
That's huge.
Yeah,
that's huge, because it's one thing for somebody to go and take personal responsibility and own their stuff to themselves, and maybe between them and God, or them and a counselor or any kind of sponsor if they're in 12-step recovery or anything. But when a person can go and say to another person, hey, this is what was going on. It's not who I am. It's not who I want to be. And it's not what you deserve. There's something that starts to really heal the effects of that, because we're always interpreting our environment like my worth. What's my worth? You know, what's my worth? Am I lovable? Am I loved? You know, and we're interpreting that. And so if we have a situation where somebody did something and they come back and go, that was not about you. That wasn't even about your mom. You know, that was about me being lost in that moment and needing to but now I'm waking up and I'm doing something different. And then the living change, you know, of actually having, consistency and showing up. And being there and feeling your feelings and creating an atmosphere where your children can feel their feelings is huge.
That's a big thing in our house, is being able to share stuff like that and to not feel judged at all. You know, there was this an army friend of mine who's a Lakota. And he shared this saying that his brother, who was a spiritual leader in the Lakota tribe, shared, which I think was very, very powerful. He said that warriors are not being a warrior is not about learning how to kill. Being a warrior is not about learning how to protect. Being a warrior isn't about looking for people to hurt. Being a warrior is learning how to cry. Being a warrior is learning to protect your family, to heal yourself, and connect with those around you.
Absolutely, because if you think about it, if the warrior was just about protecting the family from somebody outside of something, but then the people in the family don't feel safe with you, right? Then it's about being a warrior. Then is about being strong enough or having. We all are strong enough, believe it or not, whether you believe it, that you have the strength or not. You only know when you have the strength when you use it. And so you could think you don't, but if you start to do the thing, you'll find that it's there. And so when you can be strong enough to feel your feelings, and when you can be strong enough to admit you're wrong, and I used to hate being wrong because I was so afraid that nobody would ever respect me if they knew I was wrong that often. And I was wrong often. I'm not wrong often anymore, but I was but I saw the value in being wrong, because you can't change anything. You can't heal. There's no humility, and people are always like, there's no room for them to be wrong too. Everybody's always trying to be right all the time, but nobody's happy. Everybody's always guarded. Guarded people teach people to be guarded. And so yeah. So when you guys got out, what was your experience?
My experience was that I picked up where I left off.
In
but I was
drinking
and using.
Okay.
So I was not functional in even being out in the real world, as we call it. What are we going to do now that we're in the real world? We had everything taken care of. All we had to do is show up, be present.
Interesting.
And for the moment of training, it was that we just had to be there. But, when I got out, I was able to, I was a great employee at the time. I was able to show up at work. I was always very militant. Everything was military. And I carried that off when I became a civilian, which was good in a lot of parts. But, my addiction and really took a hold of me. And I went back to the old way of living. Because I got out of the military. It was like, so what do I do now? I did some contract work before I got off. So I was in the Middle East for a short time. I was actually there and on my way back 2 weeks out of 9/11. And so that stopped us from going back. The people are working for, we're not, now that we know there's some inside, Saudis that I was in Riyadh at the time, Saudi Arabia, and they were saying we should hold off and going back. Now that we're figuring out a lot of the guys that were, in the planes were Saudis. There was a big percentage of them. So, I was able to get through that. It was a good thing for me. I came back. I got a job with Northrop Grumman. I worked with I was working on, they call it the Black World because they were working on the stealth bomber at the time. I had a secret clearance, so I was able to get in really easy because my secret clearance, allowed me, it was for 10 years and I still had it. And to my understanding, a civilian secret clearance, it was about $10,000. So I was able to get in there. So I had opportunities because of my military background, but it was my disease of my
addictions.
It was my addiction
PTSD.
and PTSD and all my circumstances, which I went back to, and
When did you get, and what prompted you to get sober?
Well, it's a great story. I had 2008. I was here also, but I went back to Los Angeles because of the recession. And I went back there and I found a job that was in Culver City at the time. And ended up my supervisor was in recovery.
Oh, interesting.
And so he knew something was happening. And one day he says, Carl's coming in hungover, showing up late. So the shift happened where everything from my military experience of showing up and just being, on.
Right.
I started, not showing up for work and stuff like that. But he was a good guy. I knew there was something. And he introduced me to recovery. He gave me this pamphlet and I didn't get it. What he was talking about, but he says, there's something going on. He didn't say that I had it, but he suggested it with this pamphlet.
It's a very delicate subject.
Right.
Especially I'm sure, with people like military, ex-military. So I just want to tell you that there may be a problem going on here, but here's a pamphlet. I'm going to walk away now.
I went with this suggestion. It was in Venice Beach. And I walked in and I just said, these are not my people. I'm not like these people. I'm not as bad.
Yeah.
And so that was my journey.
Yeah.
How I got it was just see how that works, and the connection with other people, knowing that there's something going on and he could maybe be just like me. So that was my first experience with that. And
And then you've been sober again how long?
It was 2009 that I got sober, so it'll be 14 years, January 7th.
So do you feel, though, and this is a really good subject, so the whole mindset in the military of, you could party and you can drink and you could do stuff as long as you get your job done. And it doesn't really cater to anybody, needing or being vulnerable or like really getting in touch with their feelings. And I assume, correct? Like, did you guys have these powwows where you guys passed around tissue boxes ever? Like, did you ever have it where you felt like you could connect in the military and really like go deep and talk about anything? Or was it all just, really, I'm sure it wasn't a mixed bag, right? Like, did you ever have people that you connected with that you felt in the military that you could talk to? Or was it just really just more of a camaraderie for mission of what you're focused on and being there and the structure and everybody having each other's back, but people not needing and being vulnerable and feeling feelings and stuff like that? Was that?
It's strange.
Yeah, I think that there's an old Native American saying, the strength of the wolf is in the pack, the strength of the pack is in the wolf.
I like that.
The men and women in the military don't fight for the flag. They don't fight for baseball. They don't fight for apple pie. Yeah. They fight for the people on either side of them. Yeah. And the biggest thing that you never, ever want to do, and you can screw up a lot of things. Mm-hmm. You can forget to detach from the aircraft you're refueling. Yeah. That's a bad day.
That's a thing. Yeah.
You can blow up things before they're supposed to be blown up. That's a thing.
Yeah.
You don't ever want to let the team down. And I remember going to pet shops to buy antibiotics that are supposed to be for dogs because somebody might have gotten an infection from a tattoo. If you go to the corpsman, then the corpsman puts you on medical status. And if the unit goes somewhere, you're not deployable.
So that's a good point. Yeah. You don't really, you want to show that you're totally capable of being everything that anybody needs to rely on when you're in the military. You don't want to show that you're weak or that there's something going on. Like, this is just, negative connotations, but you want, like, never let them see you sweat kind of a thing. Like, you want people to be able to feel that they could rely on you, and they don't want to be worried, so-and-so is having a feeling, am I going to be able to count on him when we're really, when the fecal matter hits the oscillating device, right? So now, people who have PTSD or addictions that maybe grew and was on steroids in the military or whatever it is, frozen feelings, whatever, and they come out and they're in the world, in society, right? Because it's all the world, but they're in society and they're integrating, and people sometimes can know that they possibly need help, but the thinking keeps saying no. You shouldn't. You should be you should be tougher. You should be stronger. You should, other people are able to come out and do XYZ. You should be able to too. And so we were talking about how, you gotta reach the veterans that have PTSD or addiction and let them know that there are things that can help them. And that's true and fine and great. Sure. And there's a lot of really good energy put towards making these things available. And so that's great too. And I love all of that. But we're also about what is the biggest block to getting recovery and to getting help. Here it is. And so if I think I shouldn't need help, if I think I should be tough and man up, and because women can man up too, and if I think if I have to have that kind of belief and I have to feel like that's of value out now in the world, what has to happen for somebody to have that shift, right? That they hit a bottom and they're saying, you know what? I'm done. A bottom isn't you lose your wife, your kids, your job, your health. That's not the bottom. You don't even have to lose any of that stuff to hit a bottom. The bottom is this tipping point where what you've been tolerating is just become intolerable. Where your life has just become intolerable to you. It could have been intolerable to your wife. It could have been intolerable to your kids, your husband. It could have been intolerable to your employer. it could have been intolerable to anybody else, but until it's intolerable to you, until you have a moment where you said in your spiritual shift, the buck stops here. What do I really want? Is this the life I really want? Something's not going to change. Because we could tell you all the things you could do, right, to go get help. And there are some really great things. There's a Veterans Alcoholics Anonymous meeting over at the meeting space every Saturday at 10:00 or 10 a.m. if you're me. And it's really, really great for anybody struggling. There's Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families meeting, which is a great 12-step program for people who grew up with trauma or dysfunction or militaristic parents. There's also a program, for Al-Anon, program Nar-Anon, and these are programs for people in codependency, Codependency Anonymous. And these are programs to help you change your perception, change all this. We have Emotions Anonymous for dealing with PTSD. And then there's tons of different types of therapy that you can get as well. We did an episode on brain spotting, which is excellent for people with severe PTSD or even just moderate levels of PTSD. And so there are things we could do to get help. But what is the biggest block, right? It's always, I don't need it or I shouldn't need it. I don't need it or I shouldn't need it. I'm not that bad or I'm too bad.
I feel that generations that we came from in the 80s, it was all about you don't show your feelings.
Yeah.
And it comes from, having to have the pride, as guys growing up. And when we were in the military, we didn't show that. It was not something we did. It's just the way it was. And I had to learn to put my pride down. It tells us, pride, ego, and being humbled.
Yeah. And
all those things I had to do and let go and say, I'm either going to save my life or continue to have all these issues that I'm not going to show my feelings.
And if you didn't do that,
I'm dead. Because of the old way and through the work in this, the work that I did in recovery has helped me to have that freedom. I don't have to be this guy that's going to be, I have to show myself as being something tougher than I today can talk about that stuff through the work that I've done. And it's given me a lot of freedom to be okay, just the person I am today. But it takes that because we come from an era, of having to be this set person. This is what a military guy should be. Put your head up, stick your chest out, and just keep moving. That's how we did it in the military, and if that's what the case was, that we just keep pushing. We were pushed to the limits in a lot of stuff that we did. Sleep, not being able to sleep, food, stuff that were taken from us. And it was just, we were just put in situations that survival was the only thing that we could do. And the military gave us that qualities.
What's interesting too is that when you go into the military, you don't believe that you're capable of half the stuff that you end up being capable of doing in there, right? Yeah. So you would never believe that you're capable of going through that kind of deprivation, that kind of pushing, that kind of stuff that you went through, seeing and experiencing what you experience. So person before you, former you, doesn't believe that military you could have actually accomplished that until military you becomes a reality. And so then take that thinking, and if you have a problem, recognize that current you may not believe that you can heal whatever it is you need to heal. But there's a future version of you that will be sitting in a chair like this that'll be like, wow, look what I've healed, because I was willing to take that chance. We are reaching the end of our show. Does anybody have any last minute suggestions or comments?
Yeah, I'd like to just add one thing. One of the things that I've really discovered is one of the major keys in everything, and we're going to get really mushy right now, but and the question that everybody gets very uncomfortable with, but I think is the key to a lot of things, not just recovery, but just a lot of things in life is really looking at yourself in the mirror and asking yourself, do you love yourself? Do I love me? And then if the question is very uncomfortable, if the answer is no, then the work starts there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So, thank you.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. This has been amazing. Thank you so
Wonderful.
much. I'm so glad you could be here. This is just beautiful, and I hope you got something out of this this episode. Thank you again for joining us on the Real Recovery Show. We'd like to give a special thanks to our sponsor and gracious host, PHLV Radio here in Las Vegas. See you next week.